But yeah, look, it is a key point that the muscles recruited, and especially those that are become the limiting factor in an exercise, are going to vary considerably based on your individual anatomy and of course your technique and everything like that as well. Because this is actually something that people, sometimes create a straw man about. They'll say, "Oh, come on, what do you mean your quads aren't working? Your quads are obviously working if you're squatting 180 kilos or whatever you squat. Just squat heavy, bro, and it's fine." But the reality is that when you're trying to build muscle, what you're trying to do is not just have the muscle work. Okay, that's clearly not enough. It's that you want that specific muscle that you're trying to target to become the limiting factor. Okay, so while someone might be squatting and getting stronger and everything, and their quads might be getting good work in, they could be finishing the set at 0 reps in reserve for their low back because it's sore or they're starting to lean forward and that's the limiting factor, but still be at 5, 6 reps in reserve for their quads, that their quads have more in the tank, but their low back is the thing that's becoming a limiting factor. Similarly, people who have similar complaints on bench press, they might find that their shoulders are the limiting factor and their chest, again, could have 5, 6 reps in reserve, but the shoulders have 0 reps in reserve. So when we talk about like reps in reserve and RPE and proximity to failure, etc., we're always talking about that, or we're trying to specify that a little bit with respect to, okay, what is causing the failure? Like, what is bringing you to that point? And if it's not the target muscle or target muscles, then we're not exactly achieving what we want. We have this conversation very often with clients as it relates to grip, for example. If someone's doing deadlifts and their grip is the limiting factor, as opposed to their glutes, their hamstrings, their low back, etc., then that's kind of pointless from a muscle building perspective because your grip is going to be drastically weaker than the load that could be carried by your glutes, hamstrings, and posterior chain. So, just important to qualify that discussion that when we say, oh, someone's anatomy might lead to them not getting much quad stimulus out of an exercise, we're not saying the quads aren't working, or in a bench press, we're not saying the chest isn't working, but rather that other factors, whether that be joint pain, muscle fatigue in another area, or a grip limitation, etc., that's becoming a limiting factor where we don't want it to be.
Yeah, 100%. So basically, learn some basic anatomy. The more you learn on it, the better you're going to get results, or the better results you're going to get, I should say. Right. So that's the foundation. We learn anatomy. Again, pick up a simple book, literally go on Google, go on like whatever, Wikipedia, and be like, chest muscles, and get a, fairly broad basic understanding of, okay, these are the chest muscles, like this is also something that you see a lot of the time where learning to exercise from the choreography standpoint can actually leave you in a severe deficit in terms of being able to target certain muscles. For example, you might be like, okay, I know how to train the triceps, but if I was to be like, right, how do you train the different aspects of that tricep? You might be at a complete loss, being like, oh, well, the only exercises I know are like a tricep, press down, skull crusher, maybe, and like maybe an overhead, some sort of overhead extension, right? If I was like, oh, how do you train your long head? You might be just at a complete loss. You might be like, I actually don't know. Now, obviously, like, well, I'm not saying we can just completely isolate whatever ahead of the tricep or whatever, but like how can we bias more tension here? Like, you might be able to get fantastic results. A certain aspect of your muscle might be just responding really well, but another aspect just might not be, right? And you might be like, well, I actually want to get better results for this aspect of the muscle. Again, to whatever degree we can target certain aspects of a given muscle, but you might be like, I want to just bias my training towards that a little bit. If you don't understand how to modify exercises or make better exercise selection choices, what are you going to do? Again, just do more or less of that exercise that you are currently doing. It's like you come to an impasse, you come to a plateau where you're like, your level of knowledge gets stopped. If all you know is choreography, then where do you go from there? Again, this becomes very apparent when you have body parts that respond really well. You're just like, okay, I don't know, my upper body seems to be progressing quite nicely. It's like I'm getting great return on investment, but my lower body is just not progressing. Again, where do you go if you don't understand anatomy? You might be like, well, I'm doing the same amount of volume for these muscle groups, the legs, as I'm doing for my upper body. Is that the issue? Do I need to do less, more, whatever? And it's like, if we go back and we understand anatomy, you might be like, okay, the exercise selection choices that you've made, they're not ideal for you, right? So we go back to that, right?